Is that
Yes. 1 second.
Okay.
My apologies. The first one will be Julie Buana, and I will be able to. All right, go for it.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear. Did you say Julie?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Julie, go ahead.
Okay, great. We do not have true accountability in Seattle. In spite of the consent decree, Seattle police officers continue to harass, brutalize, and murder community members, protected by this ineffective accountability system that is rigged by design. How can we possibly have accountability when 9 of the 11 OPA investigators are sworn police officers investigating their own coworkers? How can we possibly have accountability when, on the off chance that those police officers actually recommend discipline, the chief of police can completely ignore it? How can we possibly have accountability when the spa contract continuously takes the city 5 steps back when the community can make a half step forward? Finally, how can we possibly have accountability with accountability partners that stay silent in the face of continued systematic and systemic oppression by the police department? We, as a community, need to create an accountability system that works and works for us. Please go to seattlestop.org to find out how we can create community-controlled police oversight together. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. Jesse, do we have another?
Yes, we have a number more. Kiki Buttons is next, but I don't see anyone under that name. So we'll go to Howard Gale.
Okay, Dr.
You should be able to speak now, Dr. Gale.
Dr. Gale, go ahead. Howard, are you there? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kim. I appreciate that. Jesse, can we
Next up,
cue
we'll
the next
have
person?
next up we'll have Alana. Alana,
Okay.
you should be able to speak now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Ilana Lessing, and I am calling because I am having intense frustration at both the CPC and the OPA for their lack of a police accountability. In my attempt to find a list of ways officers avoid accountability, I've come up with frontline investigations, expedited investigations from the OPA just recommending a supervisor contract or contact your supervisor action, mediation, or a training referral, an OPA allegation removed, an unfounded training referral inconclusive, an OPA director amends the finding. Once the finding is found insane, they could recommend a no discipline oral or written. Like they can have a sworn they require sworn investigations on every our officer investigating every single case that can lead to a potential termination. And finally, they can appeal to the chief. This is even just part of the way that SBE officers avoid accountability within the OPA, and absurd and ridiculous. I also would want to bring up that how can the CPC be a way to hold the police accountable if one of your members, Mark Mullins, is on the Brady list, on the list of officers that are not able to testify in courts because of previously dishonesty and for reasons that aren't even made public that we don't know why. It's incredibly frustrating to try and find any sort of accountability within this system. And I ask you guys to actually do something, even though I know you guys are intentionally don't have any power under the consent decree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. Jesse?
Yes, the next will be Valerie. And Valerie, you should be able to speak now.
Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, CPC. This morning you'll be discussing the 2020 annual report from the OPA. You may get a personal presentation of the report from Andrew Myerberg, similar to the one he gave at the City Council Public Safety meeting last week. SPD's abusive responses to protesters last summer daylighted what we know from other incidents and contexts. The behavior of Seattle police officers in general hasn't significantly changed in the 9 years of a reform program under the consent decree. The OPA received a record number of complaints about the police abuse at the protests, but its findings were that basically SPD's actions were lawful and proper. How can we achieve true and meaningful reform of the police when the offices that should be the watchdogs do not hold them accountable for abuse? I've read the OPA's 2020 annual report. It presents metrics and measurements that are essentially meaningless when the system of police abuse is allowed to continue. The very least the CPC can do in response to this report is to ask some hard and critical questions. In the long run, please go beyond that and consider this. For real accountability in Seattle, we need a 100% civilian oversight system. Other cities around the US are making those big changes, and we can too. Find out more at seattlestop.org.
Thank you, Valerie.
The next is going to be Braxton. And Braxton, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hello?
Hello. Go ahead, Braxton.
All right. So in Seattle's current policing landscape, there is still not nearly enough accountability. And we see that from the OPA's lackluster report, the recent killings of civilians, and the unfair treatment of protesters exercising their own rights. Since the creation of our accountability system, more people have been killed by Seattle police than before. We need a system that truly holds police accountable from every level, when they're harassing your children on the street to killing our loved ones. SPD has skated by without accountability since its inception, and at this rate, it does not look like that will change. What we have seen in Seattle and on a national level is that when a police officer is found guilty of misconduct, unless the case is on the front page of the paper and headlining the news, it is easy for them to escape accountability. It should not take the intention of the entire city, state, country, or world in order to ensure that these officers are held accountable. It should only take the accountability systems that Seattle has put in place in order to accomplish this. But yet we have seen that these systems are being used in a way to obstruct true justice rather than to achieve it. Please go to seattlestop.org to join the push for civilian oversight and truly meaningful police accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Braxton. And Jesse, just FYI, the timer wasn't going that time.
Yeah, I saw that. My apologies.
That's okay. Thanks. Next.
That's the end of our list. However, we did have one person try to sign up through the Q&A function. However, it was anonymous. I saw that one person had their hand up though, and that is Tally. Tally, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
Go ahead, Tally.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, I am here today to ask for police accountability. I think that it's pretty obvious that the OPA actually doesn't function. As someone that has been protesting for over a year now, the amount of officers I've seen harm Black trans people, Black people, Indigenous people severely and without fear, because they can. And I think it's really disappointing the ways in which the city doesn't hold them accountable. And I think it is scary to hear what I think Alana was saying, that there's an officer on the CPA that is on the Brady's list. Like, this doesn't feel unrelated. Like, it does feel like this is a part of the problem, right? Like, we have police watching police. And I'll tell you right now, I have seen sexual harassment. I have seen transphobic, racist remarks. I have seen bloodied people going to hospitals again and again and again. So I don't believe police accountability is happening. And I'm scared that the OPA will continue to not do anything, because there are thousands of complaints that get passed by and no officer is held accountable. So please, please, please show up for Black, Indigenous communities, show up for communities, for elders, and for the children to come. I think you can try to do better, and I hope that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Tally. Jesse, do we have any more questions
That's
or
all.
comments? Okay. With that, then we will end the public comment section. I'll hand it back to the co-chairs.
Thank you, Esther. And I just want to note for the record that I skipped over reading LaRon during attendees, and that also, and she is present, and also Prachi Dave has joined the meeting. Thank you. And now I will turn it over to LaRon.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and community members who gave public comment. I just want to let you know that the CPC really appreciates and takes to heart the comments that you provide here. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time to attend and share your thoughts. Next are department updates. Do we have an update from City Council? Typically that is Newell, and I don't see Newell here. Is there anyone else from City Council? Okay. Do we have an update from the mayor's office?
Hi, LaRon. This is Julie Klein from the mayor's office. I think Dr. Fisher and I from the Seattle Police Department are presenting a little bit later, but I don't have any other independent update today.
Great, thank you. Okay, is there an update from the monitoring team? I think I saw Ron Ward here earlier. There we go. Ron, you're muted. Ron, you're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I think that our latest update would have been set forth at the last VMAP meeting, at which you and other members of the CPC were present. We are continuing to do our due diligence with regard to the methodology and the monitoring plan, and awaiting the reports from the various stakeholders that are going to be a part of that plan in our collaborative effort to get everyone's articulation of what they believe are important and salient points before the judge.
Great. And just for clarification, because I'm fairly certain that most people on this call don't know what VMAP is, can you let people know what you mean by the VMAP meetings, what it is, how often it happens, and how long the monitoring team has been having them?
The VMAP meetings involve different aspects of city governance, including a representative from the mayor's office, the monitoring team, DOJ, the city attorney's office, and I'm sorry, I run out of I can't think of the other members.
I think
It has
accountability.
it has OPA is also present. OIG is present. This past meeting was the first meeting that the CPC has been present. And basically what is discussed is the ongoing progression of the consent decree and how to bring that together with the focus primarily on a collaborative effort. VMAP, I think we've been having these meetings for about 2 to 3 months.
I can't tell if you're still talking, Ron. Sorry, I lost you for a second. I don't know if anybody else.
Have I answered your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you so much. That was really helpful. And the CPC, I think, was invited for the first time at the last meeting, and we likely will continue attending moving forward. So thanks for letting people know what VMAP is. Were there any other updates? No. Okay, so we'll move on to OIG. Director Judge, are you here?
Yes, I am. Good morning, co-chairs. Good morning, commissioners. I think the only thing that I want to highlight is you should be receiving our annual report for partner feedback soon. At long last, we've been delayed because of other work and projects, but we'll be getting that to you folks in fairly short order in the next week or two. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. DOJ, Christina Fogg, do you have an update?
Hi, good morning. For once, I get to follow Ron and say I have nothing to add to his update. So thank you, Ron, for going first. But yes, I'm always available for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Christina. Next up, we'll move on to CPC updates, and I'll hand that over to Erin.
Well, Ron really stole my thunder because I was going to tell you all about the VMAP meeting that we attended. So I will actually turn it over to Brandy. Oh, wait, I actually have one more thing. You will have noticed that you received earlier today the invitation for the introductory meeting for all of the work groups have gone out. If you did not receive that or you have any questions, let us know. But we are starting those coming up in the next couple of weeks and are really excited to get the work started. So check your email and RSVP for your work group meeting. Thank you. Brandy.
Okay, we just must be following suit this morning because that was one of my updates. So I just have a couple for everybody. Staff is continuing to work on the annual report. And then we're gearing up for our mid-year report for council. We're also currently working on the semi-annual report for the monitoring team. So that's all I have this morning. Thank you.
All right, and now do we have any new business that any commissioners would like to bring to the table? Okay, and with that, I will turn it back to you, Ron.
Great. And as many of our public commenters noted, today we have the Office of Police Accountability here with us to talk about their 2020 annual report. I do want to thank Commissioner Elena Santillan for requesting, I believe it was Elena, maybe Elena and Douglas, requesting that we have OPA come and give a presentation about the annual report and an opportunity for the commissioners to ask questions and just delve a little bit further into the details around it. And with that, I will turn it over to Director Myerberg.
Sorry, getting off mute. Thank you for having us here. We earlier, I guess last week, we had emailed Brandy and the co-chairs to ask kind of what would be the most helpful presentation to have for you all. The thought was that we would do just basically a rerun of our presentation before the council, and then obviously we will try to keep it much more brief than the council presentation, but please feel free to interrupt us or direct us in new directions as we don't, this is more for you than for us. So without further ado, I will leave it to Ann Bettisworth and Lauren Caputo to present, and I'll be chiming in to answer questions or as needed.
All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, sorry, Lauren. I was just going to introduce myself. My name is Ann Bettisworth. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Affairs and Policy at OPA. I'll be presenting this morning with Andrew and with Lauren. And Lauren's going to start us off. Can you all see the screen okay? Is the PowerPoint showing? Perfect.
Yeah, it looks good. And I'm Lauren Caputo. I'm the Data and Policy Analyst at OPA. And let's get started. All right, 40% of sworn SPD employees received a complaint in 2020. And then with civilian employees, which are also shown in this graph, it averages out to 30% of all SPD employees, sworn and civilian, received a complaint in 2020, which is the same number that we reported in 2019. Our three most common allegations are professionalism, use of force, and bias. And those are the same three that we've had in previous years, but just slightly reordered. And we'll get into this more in the next slide. So these were 4 allegations that increased significantly due to the police response to the protests. So use of force allegations increased 170% from 2019. Supervisory responsibility increased significantly because of supervisors directing action at protest, ordering officers to disperse crowds. Their reporting requirements causes a lot of complaints to fall on supervisors. Equipment and uniform allegations in a lot of these cases were due to the mourning badges initially, and then later to the mask complaints about officers not masking up. And then de-escalation goes hand in hand with the force use allegation increase. So when we're analyzing whether.
Yeah, sorry, just chiming in really quickly. There's a lot of confusion usually between allegations and complaints. So just so everyone's aware, a complaint is a contact with OPA that generally results in a case or an investigation. An allegation is one of many policy violations that are identified as being at issue in a case. So every case could have multiple policy violations. So for example, there could be a protest case, one protest case that would have 6 involved officers with 3 or 4 different force allegations on each, depending on the less lethal tools or other things that they did. So just keep in mind, these aren't necessarily investigations, they're just allegations.
Yeah, so actually we had a 58% increase in all allegations received in 2020, even though the total number of cases went down, although in addition, the number of investigated cases went up. So, I mean, there was a greater increase in the number of allegations than there was in the cases because more allegations were linked to a single case. So here we are with complaints classified. More than half of complaints were classified for investigation, so 56%. We had 432 cases that went to full investigation, or to investigation full and expedited in 2020. And you can see how that's increased over previous years and how supervisor action and contact logs went down.
And just to clarify, because I don't know whether there's confusion about what these are. So supervisor actions where OPA identifies minor issues that are better remedied by training or counseling. So for example, if an officer did not complete a report or completed a report that was below standards, and that's the first time they've ever done so, that would likely be sent back as a supervisor action as opposed to going through a full investigation. And we are prevented by our manual and by the accountability ordinance from doing supervisor actions for bias, dishonesty, use of force, or any sort of serious misconduct. So generally, these are for very minor issues that are better remedied through training and counseling rather than an investigation. And then contact logs are what they sound like. It's a case that we just log and we don't do a full investigation on. And generally, contact logs are cases where for example, someone saying they were stopped on the highway and improperly ticketed, and that was Washington State Patrol, so it's not Seattle, or they're contesting a ticket or asking for a police report. Those are the types of cases that are then put on the contact log and not handled as an investigation.
All right, so this graph is showing investigations, so complaints that have gone through the first 30-day intake preliminary investigation and are classified for investigation. So more of OPA's investigations in 2020 stemmed from community member or external complaints. And so these are those 432 cases that we investigated last year. Nearly 2/3 of them were filed by the public to OPA, which is, as you can see.
Yeah, and we think that's a result of the, sorry, Lauren, a result of the protest. I mean, just given the influx of complaints we got is probably the reason for this, along with other, we think maybe the unsubstantiated misconduct screening program is part of it too. But this is a big increase looking from 2018 to 2020.
18% of cases completed in 2020 contained one or more sustained findings. And then 0 sustained findings in 2020 were overturned by the chief. There was one recently in 2021, but since this was from our 2020 report, there was nothing overturned in 2020.
So the sustain rate is it's a case rate, not an allegation rate. So it looks at the percentage of cases that resulted in one or more sustained findings. So the 18% is pretty standard. Usually we fluctuate between 15 up to maybe 20% is the sustain rate. So this is in the range of where we usually are. With regard to the overturning by the chief, this is something that we've been talking a lot about creating a database, or at least a place on our website for people to be able to access this information. So I think we're going to do that coming up in the next couple of months, where we'll be able to put all the information regarding overturned cases, including OPA's decision, the chief submissions from the CPC and other city partners. So they're all in one place so that people can access everything.
So 68 SPD employees were disciplined following OPA investigations in 2020. 4 employees were disciplined in more than one case each. And written reprimands, as you can see, were the most common disciplinary action, followed by suspensions, oral reprimands. And then some of these discipline pendings have since been decided. This was written a couple months ago when we released our report. So more has been resolved since then. And disciplinary appeals had a significant drop in 2020. Only 8 were filed compared to 27 the previous year. 2 of those last year were filed with the Public Safety Civil Service Commission, and 6 were filed through the arbitration process. And all of this data is on our website. We update it when an appeal is closed. And that generally happens around quarterly when we get updates from the city attorney's office.
So as we said before the city council, this is obviously a huge drop, and we don't necessarily know what the cause of the drop is. So we've sustained more force cases in 2020 than we did in 2019 or in any other year for that matter. And generally, those are the types of cases that are appealed, or force findings that are sustained. And we haven't seen those cases be appealed. So it's not clear whether it's a change in strategy by the union, whether it's they feel like the landscape is less favorable to the appeals. We don't know, but again, it is a statistically significant drop.
So we're going to switch over and talk a little bit about protest data and OPA's response to the protests. This slide gives an overview of what OPA kind of experienced and has dealt with to date following the protests. As you've probably heard, and we've shared multiple times, OPA was contacted about 19,000 times starting in late May, and most of these contacts happened in late May and early June. So the 19,000 represent a lot of duplicate complaints, a lot of form letters, a lot of people who saw, for example, this pepper spraying of the child and called our office. About 13,000, in fact, of these contacts were about the child pepper spray issue. So the funnel represents the 19,000, and out of those 19,000, we narrowed it down to 145 unique incidents that we investigated. Of those 145, 99 have been completed to date. This is a week or two old, so it's probably going to change soon. And of the 99, 18 of those contain sustained allegations, and 12 of them are attached to systemic policy recommendations that we made to the Seattle Police Department to change some of their tactics or training as a result of perhaps an unclear policy, a deficient policy, a policy that needs updating. So that's kind of the...
Oh, sorry, Ann. I was going to say the most of the cases, so of the approximately 46 cases that are still outstanding, when we talk about demonstration cases, they're not just relating to the early days of the demonstration, so late May into early June. We added demonstration cases kind of throughout the summer, into the fall, even into the winter, and further. So the 180 deadline is still moving for some of these cases. There's also a bunch that have unknown employees. So someone said that they were affected by a blast ball or by pepper spray at a certain area of the city, and we have not been able to identify either the person, the complainant, or the officer who may have used the force. So those cases aren't not governed by a 180-day timeline, and we're still assessing video to see whether we can identify the named employees and the incident. So we are within the timeline for these cases, or they have no timeline.
Thanks, Andrew. So OPA increased transparency because we realized that there was a heightened public interest around information and what OPA was doing to investigate these cases. So OPA took a variety of different actions. One was we created a public dashboard on our OPA website, and this gave little donut graphs like the ones you see on your screen that showed each investigation as a result of a protest case and what % complete it was, in addition to the step in the investigation where that particular investigation was at the moment. The public dashboard also shows all the closed case summaries, the resulting policy recommendations. So we update that every 3 weeks currently, but earlier in the year, we were doing it every 1 week or 2 weeks. We tweet out when we're closing these cases, or we do a tweet whenever we have a major incident that we want to make sure the public is aware that we're closing a case on. We also started creating explanatory videos, taking pieces of in-car video, body-worn video, and third-party video, and breaking it down and showing on the screen why Director Myerberg reached the findings that he did. We would do either voiceover narration or on-screen writing, slowing down the video and showing, circling the areas so that the public could more easily see how we came to the conclusion that the office came to. These, we put all of these on YouTube and started a YouTube channel so that the public could kind of have an easier way than reading a multi-page finding and a visual way to process the investigations. We also increased our media presence. Andrew was doing a lot of interviews. He was on in in a lot of newspaper articles. We were trying to be very accessible to various journalists, independent papers, mainstream papers, make sure that the public understood the actions that OPA was taking, and that we were willing to be as transparent as possible under the, while of course abiding by all the contractual and legal requirements that we have to do. So we're going to shift now to talk about state legislative work. This was an area of work that OPA had not previously focused on, but considering this was such a big year for police reform, there were a ton of bills at the state legislature and lots of ideas floating around. And we wanted to be a resource to state legislators, other policymakers, and the public. So we began evaluating a lot of these recommendations, and these recommendations came from the public, they came from different community groups, they came from policymakers themselves. We compiled them all in a spreadsheet, divvied them up by staff, and ended up researching and drafting comprehensive white papers on about 23 of them. We used this information to arm ourselves with the knowledge so that we could have conversations with various individuals about the policies, about how they would affect Seattle or not affect Seattle, and about the different nuances and ways that they could help reform some of Seattle police tactics and behavior. Of these 23 white papers that we wrote, we took 7 of them that we felt would be the most impactful in Seattle or in the state, and developed one-pagers on those, forwarded them to state lawmakers, and met with them on these issues. Director Myerberg testified in various committee hearings. We had one-on-one meetings. We did a lot of editing of bill drafts, a lot of behind-the-scenes work to make sure that legislators had information that they needed when making some of these very important decisions. So Andrew, I'm going to kick this over to you to talk about any staffing or upcoming issues.
Yep. So as I think everyone on this call is aware, OPA, based on the last contractual agreement with SPOG, OPA was authorized to hire 2 civilian investigators. We did so in 2020. Both had former experience investigating. One came from the Chicago Office of Police Accountability, or COPA. The other one came from the Federal Defender's Office, and both are attorneys. We also continue to kind of evolve and reevaluate our staff and how we are using our staff. We changed, this is a little bit different, where we have since changed our investigation organization. We're now, instead of having a deputy director, we have 2 assistant directors, and we've broken our group back into teams, and we're now hiring for a 3rd investigation supervisor, and we're going to have 3 different teams. And the reason we did that was we saw that in our organization we had a lot of gluts. So all cases were going through the investigation supervisor and then all going through the deputy director, and it just was taking more time. So we're trying to streamline our processes to be better organized and to be more efficient. So and obviously, to the extent that the contract negotiations result in additional civilians being added as investigators, we'll look to hire those in 2021. A couple future state things that we're trying to do. We do think the videos were really effective. The ability to, in a mass media sense, explain the findings and why I issued the decision that I issued. So we're going to be looking to hire a video analyst that would do that full time, with the goal, I think the ideal goal being that every time we issued a DCM, which is my finding memo, that it would be accompanied by a video that would be sent to the complainant and then embedded into our website. We're also going to be doing a lot more work in this upcoming year with data and with dashboards, and that's going to be something that Lauren will work on, and we're also looking to hire another individual that will be doing that as well to support her. So those are some of the future things considering, and I think that's it, correct? So I'm not sure if there's any questions from commissioners or from others, but that's the contents of our presentation.
Great, thank you, OPA and Director Myerberg. There are a number of questions that have been placed in the Q&A section of the chat. We may or may not be able to get to some of those. Our main goal right now is to allow commissioners to ask questions. It would be helpful for me, I don't know about anyone else, Jesse, if you could get rid of the shared screen so that we can see each other in the gallery view, that would be great. Okay, thanks. Commissioners, does anyone have questions for the OPA about their annual report presentation? Okay, I see Prachi has her hand up. Prachi?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated it. So the question that I have is that if we have, we're in a situation where we have, about 40% of SPD who have complaints filed against them, what are the next steps there in order to address the fact that, there are, that's quite a significant percentage of the police force. And so just wondering what the next steps are in terms of policy or to address the fact that there are that many complaints.
A good question. I mean, a couple of things to consider is that, like we said before in the presentation, like that number is not necessarily an outlier from past years. And part of the reason that that number is so high is because of the high standards for when complaints must be referred to OPA. So unlike a lot of other jurisdictions, anytime someone says, that was too much force, or, you did something because of X reason. I mean, there's so many mechanisms that require a mandatory referral to OPA where perhaps in other jurisdictions that would not be the case. So I don't know that I don't know that there's any policies that can be put in place to reduce complaints. I mean, obviously you would want to see over time that complaints went down, and I think we were seeing that until the protests hit. But certainly it's something we're always thinking about is what can we do to improve officer conduct, to improve systems, while understanding that there will be just a certain baseline number of complaints given the reporting requirements and just giving the number of contacts between community members and police officers.
Prachi, I just want to give you an opportunity to ask any follow-up questions that you might have to Director Myerberg's answer to your question.
Yeah, no, I completely see that. And, I think it's, what I'm wondering is rather than, kind of seeing it as an opportunity, as you mentioned, Director Myerberg, seeing it as an opportunity to improve conduct so that those complaints do not come in. And one of the reasons may very well be, as you said, right, that we have high standards, but I think those high standards are a good thing, right? And if corresponding impact is that we have high complaint levels, then, I think the separate question there is whether or not, this is a question that can be then referred to OIG to address on a policy level to see how we can reduce the number of complaints based on the high standards that we do have. So maybe not a question as much as a statement.
I think it's a good point. I mean, certainly something that can be done that we haven't done for sure. And then maybe this is something that's in the OIG's wheelhouse, just to look at other jurisdictions, like look at the comparable jurisdictions around the country and to see what their rates are. I mean, the problem is that I don't know that you would have the same level of reporting, and that, most other jurisdictions are totally internal. So it's just there's less accessibility to information. So I don't know that you'd be able to find it out, but perhaps the OIG, not to put work on Lisa and her team, but perhaps they could look at other jurisdictions to see what complaint rates are across the country, to compare Seattle to that, and to see what are their reporting requirements, to see first, is there a problem? Is Seattle an outlier? And then if so, start to work for strategies on how to reduce. And obviously CPC would be involved in that. We would be involved too. And it's part of the work that we already do.
Great, thank you so much. Reverend Walden?
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. My question is around, thank you for the report also, Mr. Director Myerberg. My question is around July 25th and the complaint that might have been filed that day when the videos showed that there was an increased use of force around the media. And I think that complaint, if I'm not mistaken, was not sustained. I just, could you have some conversation about that complaint, because people got hurt out there that day, and it was video footage and stuff like that. So really interested in that. And also, as you know, on May 24th, the city had already filed to come from under this, the consent decree. And, you know, they withdrew their filing from the court as the results happening out there in May, on June and on into that they withdrew their filing from the courts. And you also know that the CPC filed also contesting that they should not be lifted from the consent decree. And this was pre the event around the untimely death of murder of Mr. George Floyd.
So to address your first question, Reverend Walden, we had a couple cases that involved media from July 25th. There was the case that I think you're referring to that I recall was an officer had pepper sprayed the media while the media had hands up and was walking away. That case did result in a sustained finding. You know, maybe there's another case that I'm not thinking about that you're referring to, but happy to go back through the cases and respond in writing with that.
Andrew, might have been July 25th, the one that we released a video on.
Yeah, so there was another case. I don't know that that's what Reverend Walden's talking about, but there was a case where a reporter was sitting on a raised staircase, and she had asserted that she was targeted with a blast ball and that it caused her to suffer significant injuries. When we analyzed the body-worn video for that case and looked at all the statements, the officer said that they were doing a bang out, which means that they have a blast ball that they're not going to throw and they have to dispose of it. And they turned and walked towards a parking lot and rolled the blast ball down the parking lot. That was a slow parking lot, and it detonated. And from looking at the video, we saw the officer had a face mask on and a gas mask, and based on his statement and based on all the totality of the video, there was no evidence that any of the officers saw the reporter on the scaffolding, that they looked at the reporter, and everything that they did say and all the body-worn video that was recorded contemporaneously indicated that it was a blast out that was an unintentional deployment. So if that's the case that you're referring to, that did result in a not sustained inconclusive finding, because I couldn't disprove the fact that the officer said that he did not see the person on the scaffolding. So that was the conclusion in that case.
Well, also that person did sustain some kind of life injury that I think hearing lost, and so that person, and so again, without having any kind of appeal, there's no way that person can appeal, because so far that we haven't fixed that yet. So anyway, it was just a comment, because I know May 25th, I mean July 25th was a hard day for the media, and you know I know about it because you know that my son is out there, so that's why I know about it. So anyway, but thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. We are over time, but we'll take one last question from Catherine Seibel, and I do want to note that because we're over time, we're not likely to be able to get to, or we will not get to the community's questions in the Q&A. So hopefully the questions that the commissioners are raising and the answers that you're getting overlap with some of the questions that were raised in the Q&A function. Catherine?
Oh, this was a question that hasn't been raised in the Q&A function, and maybe it might be a quick response where you can point me to find this answer, but I was hoping to just learn more about the 7 policies you recommended and how you selected those policies.
Sure. So as Ann had said earlier, we started in the immediate aftermath of really CHOP and CHAZ, and we basically took every single idea that we had heard about, you know, whether from people that were in the CHOP CHAZ or from politicians or from CPC commissioners that we had heard during meetings. Basically anything that we had heard of, we took and we started to research and evaluate. We broke those down into 23 that we felt were directly relevant to Seattle system, or that we thought would really move our systems forward and needed state intervention. And then from that, we decided on 7. And really the 7 we decided upon were what were the changes that we thought could make the most difference at this point. So I'll give you the 7 as far as I can remember, and Ann, chip in if I'm missing something. Was collective bargaining was one. One of the proposals that we had was to pass a state law in which all accountability would be effects bargaining only. So you wouldn't bargain implementation, but only effects. We wanted to reassess the reasonableness standard. Decertification was another recommendation we had. Independent investigation, so very similar to House Bill 1367 was one that we were very supportive of. We wanted the consideration of having a special prosecutor that would evaluate and make charging decisions on all officer-involved shootings across the state. And what am I missing here?
Did you already mention the statewide de-escalation and force policies?
Yeah, statewide de-escalation and force policies. And then also a statewide database that would contain all use of force. So those were the 7 topics that we were very supportive of. I think all of them happened except for the collective bargaining reforms and for the reasonableness standard. And what the legislation ultimately did, I think in House Bill 1310, was they put in place a statewide floor for use of force and de-escalation and reporting requirements, both of which we're very supportive of, and both of which we testified on at the before the Senate and the House, I believe. But as a general matter, we felt like the more important or the bigger picture issue was reasonableness, to reassess when officers are acting in an objectively reasonable fashion, because that is kind of a fundamental question that we're always answering when we evaluate use of force cases. So we were pretty happy with obviously, I mean, not everything was done, but I think the changes that occurred at the state level, we were very impressed by and very happy with. So Catherine, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, thank you, everyone. And OPA, Director Myerberg, Ann, and Lauren, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us about your annual report and to answer our questions. We really appreciate that. Now I'm going to hand over the meeting to Erin for our next agenda topic.
Thank you, Laron. And now we are going to hear from Dr. Chris Fisher and Julie Klein. We had asked that they come and give a conversation about staffing levels. It has been in the media that, you know, staffing levels are decreasing at a time that we are seeing significant increases in violent crime. And then with that, I will turn it over to Julie and Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. Chris, are you on here? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Are folks able to see this? Great. All right. There you are, Dr. Fisher. Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Klein from the Mayor's Office. I'm her public safety advisor, and Dr. Fisher is over at the Seattle Police Department. Dr. Fisher, did you want to give a quick intro for folks that may not already know you?
Sure. Chris Fisher, I'm the Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives at SPD, which is analytics, data, whatever else the chief needs.
Staffing. All right. So we just yesterday, the April attrition and staffing numbers dropped. So we sent those over to council late yesterday. And so we've got some updated numbers on here for everybody today on SPD staffing numbers. So what we were asked to discuss with everyone today, or to brief everyone on today, is the current staffing levels and attrition trends for the Seattle Police Department, the impacts that that's having to 911 call response times, and then a quick overview of the public safety and consent decree obligations that the Seattle Police Department has. And so we will move forward here. The first thing, there are some context setting that needs to happen here first, or there is some context setting that needs to happen here. As Aaron Goodman pointed out, this has been covered kind of extensively in the media in the last several months. So there is no secret that the Seattle Police Department is experiencing extreme staffing shortages at this point. Although attrition rates, or the rates at which officers are leaving the Seattle Police Department, is slowed compared to 2020. We still are ahead of where we normally would be on any other given year. So acting or interim chief Diaz has implemented some mitigation options to try to reduce the impacts to emergency response services. I think folks are probably aware, back in the late fall, Chief Diaz redeployed about 100 officers from other parts of the department to patrol in an attempt to try to keep response times down. And there has been a full tilt effort at hiring more civilian support, crime prevention coordinators and things of that nature, potentially some community service officers as well. But there are budget restrictions and restraints that may come into play and being able to actualize some of that. And then the overtime limitations on SPD as well. We are just want to flag for folks that there is some concern, although the Seattle Police Department is very committed to staying within their overtime goals. We are reopening faster than we believed because of the amazing vaccination rate in the city of Seattle and Washington State. We are going to start having large events a lot quicker than we anticipated. So that's going to potentially have unintended impacts on the Seattle Police Department's overtime budgeting that we did at the beginning of the year. So just wanted to kind of level set on those three things before we kind of get into the data here. So Dr. Fisher, do you want to kind of go over the historical attrition rates and where we are today?
Sure. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Executive Director Grant, co-chairs and commissioners for having us. So if you have been paying attention to the sort of ongoing presentations to council, some of these information will be familiar, but we did want to make sure that the whole CPC and any folks tuning in, if they hadn't had a chance to watch a council hearing, they also got this information. So this is one of the charts we routinely show. We always are working to forecast how many folks we anticipate leaving the department and how many folks we anticipate being able to successfully hire on to the department. This is a significant portion of the work that we do, both operationally to know what we'll have to work with, to know how many people we have to train, to know what capacity we need at facilities, but also for the budget. Anywhere from around 85% of our budget is exclusively personnel, within some other sort of contract hard set prices. So knowing how many people we have and how many people we leave is essential. We traditionally have based this on a rolling average of how many people have left recently. We also consider how many individuals are retirement eligible, depending on where they are in the retirement scheme for sworn employees. We look at how many people are becoming eligible, and on average, how many people tend to leave. But this is the general pattern. This is the real numbers, but this is what we base those projections on. So normally, and we tend to go with a median when we think about it, because there can be outlier years like last year that could really throw off the average. But the median, another way to measure average, so to speak, or central tendency to talk statistics, has traditionally been around the high 50s to low 60s of separations of sworn individuals. There has been, as you can see in the graph, starting around 2014, we sort of consistently start to exceed that median. There's some correlation there to early to mid 90s hiring surges due to funding from the federal government around the country on bringing officers on, and then when people became eligible. 2018 was another sort of, had been the previous outlier year of a lot of separations in 2018. There was a lot of discussion in the media then. And then we had a full-scale push in 2019 that was continuing into the early part of 2020 to hire. and to retain, a big focus on wellness, a big focus on, we had the, this is my neighborhood campaign to get individuals who live in the city to apply to be officers. In recent years, since around 2015, our hiring rates had been, reaching, in terms of diversity, close to 40% of new hires were non-white. And then we were continuing that success into early 2020. The pandemic hit, and we had to, by about May, we stopped hiring due to budgetary issues in early May, and sort of anticipated needs to put a pause on sort of expanded city spending. And then in June and July, the separations really took off and continued throughout the rest of the year. We ended separating 186 sworn individuals in 2020. Through April of this year, as Julie said, that the pace has slowed down, but is still unusual. As you can see, through April, we're already above the median. We were at 74 separations of sworn individuals through April of this year. So next slide, Julie. And so this is just also another way we've been tracking this. As we address a workforce that on sort of both ends, we have had a lot of recent hires. There was the push under the former administration to bring on more officers. So we have a sort of a swell of younger or less tenured individuals joining the department. And then we also, speaking to that sort of that beginning sort of surge of individuals leaving as we hit sort of the retirement period from the early to mid 90s, we have seen more officers out on medical leave, paid parental leave, sort of on both ends of the spectrum there, and a variety of other issues. So we've also been tracking how many officers are we able physically to put, if we needed to, in a uniform on the street. And so you can see we've been tracking this since really our data analytics platform got really robust during the consent decree. We're able to see where everyone was every day going historically. So we're able to track the deployable number back into 2018. Basically just shows that starting around June of 2020, we see a large drop in the deployable officers. A lot of that is driven by separations, but we also did have an uptick in individuals who were out for medical issues or other issues. And so that has stabilized, we have seen coming into 2021. We were consistently sort of right around 1,080 or 1,090, depending on the day. It fluctuates as people have different issues come up. But that's sort of what the chief has to work with in terms of individuals who could be in a patrol car. Obviously, all of them are not in patrol cars. They have to do investigations and other functions. But this is just, when we work it out to how many hours an individual generally works in a year, this loss of deployable officer count does equate to close to 300,000 hours that we don't have out on the street doing various jobs. And so that's just, when we're talking about staffing, hiring, attrition, and sort of what we're able to do to prevent and intervene in crime, that's a challenge currently. And so then how does that translate into 911 response? We think one of the sort of the broadest measures that might be the sort of the easiest to see what's happening on the street, when a commander in a precinct or citywide commander, depending on what time of day it is, if they notice that due to call volume, due to a major event, due to low staffing, that they are not able to handle the emergency and urgent calls, and definitely can handle sort of the lower priority 3 and priority 4 calls where there's nothing immediately happened, a quick response is not essential. They can call the 911 dispatch center and say, we need to go to priority status. Priority status means we are focusing on responding first to all priority 1 emergency, get their lights and sirens now, and when possible, priority 2, where it's important to get there quickly, but maybe not running, as they say, running code, going faster than the speed limit through intersections, et cetera. So that becomes the focus. And we, when we track this, we see this upswing, we see the first big jump in that 2018 when we had some staffing losses of the number of days where sometime in that day, at least a part or the whole patrol division was in priority call status. And then we see that peak in 2020, where 225 days out of 365, at some portion of the day in those 225 days, we were only going to priority 1 and 2 calls in at least one precinct. And then we see through April, we're already at 120. And I think in 2020 and 2021, what's important there is due to COVID and our COVID call handling status sort of adjustments, we are not going to as many low priority calls. If people are amenable, we're asking them to complete that report over the phone or on our online reporting system, just to decrease that face-to-face contact. That was especially important, I think, early on when we were all still, I think, getting our feet under us and understanding the pandemic and how to safely, sort of continue to navigate life. Those call status restrictions are still in place. We've been discussing, when the governor potentially reopens the state, is that a time to dial that back? We're trying to figure out how to do all of that safely, but we're still having to go to priority status, even when a lot of those calls are not being dispatched, just because the staffing constraints, that the officers are with the minimum number of people we have on patrol at any time, and even the reduced call volume, it's still happening on a number of days where we're having to restrict going just to the emergency or urgent calls. So just it's an illustration of sort of both the continued busyness and the effect of constraint on staffing. And then how this translates to how fast someone sees a police officer if they call 911. So on the right, you see examples when we talk about priority 1. Again, that's something that's in progress, where it just occurred, it's life safety. So you see some examples, and someone saying like, I'm being assaulted, my friend is being assaulted, a domestic violence call, someone who is actively been identified as committing suicide or trying to commit suicide or about to, shots fired. You see the examples. And then priority 2, it's important to get there quickly. It likely is a completed event, but it's important to get there to assist the victim. And so 3 different measures here. The red bars are how, yeah.
Can would you rather have ask questions as they come up or wait till the end? What would be easiest?
I think wait till the end. I mean, I think I'm almost done.
Okay.
And then there's like one slide. I'll try to be briefer. Sorry.
No problem.
The red bars it's a measure of our goal for priority 1 is to get there within 7 minutes. And so one way to look at that is in what % of those priority 1 emergency calls do we get there in 7 minutes? And so you see on average, early in 2014, 2015, it was about 53% of the time. In 2019, sort of the last sort of year where we had sort of closer to full staffing, we were getting there 57% of the time in under 7 minutes. And then you see in 2020, 52%, and so far this year, we're at 49%. The blue is the median for priority 1 response time. So you see, generally we had been under 7 minutes. It was ticking up in 2020, and then in 2021 so far we are above 7 minutes. And then the green is the average. Just some people average makes more sense in their brain. They all have different issues in terms of how they measure the normal experience for someone out in the community. So that's why we do both, but you can still both show the increase in 2020 and the continued in 2021. I don't remember. And then this is just sort of, I think the last one, this is showing priority 1 in blue, priority 2 in orange for the last 11 months, starting today and going back, going back to last January. But the point being, in 10 out of the last 11 months, we have not met that 7 minute goal we did in January. That may have been due to call volume being down. January is a cold, wet month. Not as many people are out, even comparatively under COVID. And then you still see the same thing in the orange. Our priority 2 goal is 15 minutes. It's not discussed quite as much as that priority 1, but we were hitting it before the pandemic. And summer of last year, the numbers had come back down. And I think as we've continued to see staffing losses, the numbers have gone back up to where we're now close back to 20 minutes for priority 2. Oh, I think this is the last one. This is just the count of how many officers are assigned to respond to 911 over the past 7 years. And then you see that orange bar. If you add on, as Julie mentioned, the chief assigned folks back to patrol and stood up the community response group to sort of be an extra resource at our busiest time. We have 3 shifts, and the CRG, the community response group, is a 4th shift that overlaps our 2 busier shifts to help have capacity. So you see where we would be if chief had not assigned those 100 is really that blue. And then for that 1 shift a day, there are extra people, about half of the full number each day are in CRG. So it is a little bit more available, but it's not all day long. It's only for an 8-hour shift, sort of overlapping our 2nd and 3rd watch shifts. But just a sense of we have continued to lose people who are responding to 911 calls, even with the chief pushing folks back into 911 patrol cars. Really, as we've continued to have separations, some of that has come out of patrol, and so we've continued to go down there.
One other sort of factor that's important to note in this is that since the pandemic has begun, the courts have also been sort of operating under pandemic rules and have not been operating at full capacity. King County Superior Court did continue some level of operations and some trials, but at a fraction of its normal operating capacity. And the reason I bring that up is the chief, to redeploy officers to patrol and keep response times down, did take some officers, some detectives from investigative units. So while the courts were on limited operations, that impact wasn't necessarily felt. I mean, I'm sure it was felt by the other officers in the units who were having increased workloads, but it wasn't felt as much as it will be as the courts begin to reopen and resume full operations, as those investigative units are key to getting investigations completed and cases moving through the court system as well. So we do have some concerns as the courts begin to reopen, what kind of pressures and issues will arise from having, sort of taken folks from investigative units and moved them to patrol units. So just flagging that as something that we don't really know what that's going to look like yet, but is something that we are watching closely and are concerned about as well. Yeah, so the other thing that is important to note, and I know is a concern for the CPC specifically, is what impact the staffing has on officer burnout and officer wellness. And as everyone is aware, tired officers and overworked officers are officers that make more mistakes. And so while there is no sort of analytical way necessarily to put that into numbers, I think that is something, an undercurrent that we need to be paying attention to as well. And I think that historically has been something that the CPC has been very interested in supporting and concerned about. So just wanted to flag that as well. And then finally, there are consent decree requirements put upon the Seattle Police Department. I know a lot of folks on this call are very aware of those, but Seattle Police Department really has a couple of different obligations right now that they need to keep maintaining, which is obviously the charter obligation to maintain adequate police protection across the city, and then the contractual obligations that the Seattle Police Department has under the consent decree, which requires staffing. So that's a span of control, meaning having an adequate number of supervisors for patrol officers. And then that's also staffing up the professional standards and training units, staffing up the collaborative policing units and early intervention units, the technological innovations that are required. And then also obviously the force investigation team and the force review board, and all of that takes staffing as well. So yeah, I will stop sharing now. Actually, I may keep the PowerPoint up in case anyone has any specific questions about any specific slides that Dr. Fisher or myself need to refer back to.
Thank you. And I know that Dr. Pinto had his hand up for a bit. So go ahead, Naveen.
Thanks, everyone. So I have a question about the data that Dr. Fisher showed. I would imagine that some percentage of the 911 calls were for emergencies that potentially police would not be required for, like you mentioned, a fire or medical emergency, where, you know, Seattle Fire Department might be deployed instead of SPD. And so is there any data to suggest that those response times have been affected by this short staffing?
We could look at that. So I mean, just overall, and I'll try to be brief. Like all calls come into the SPD. Well, now I'm forgetting the acronym. I think it's officially its own thing now, but come into the call center, and then if it's identified there as a medical or fire issue, transferred to the fire call center, they then assess it on their own. Sometimes those calls get sent back. Sometimes it's a dual dispatch. Sometimes it is determined it is clearly just a fire and they don't need police, and they go. I think another way to think about it also is some of those emergency calls officers go to because of the nature of their patrol, that they're out and about. They don't roll out routinely from a station. They can get to a medical emergency faster. We have a lot of EMTs and individuals with tourniquets and other sort of first aid gear, where if they hear over the radio that, you know, there's somebody who's bleeding on the sidewalk and they're available, they try to get there because they can often get there faster, just because they might be right nearby. But that is an interesting question to look at, what's happened to the response times for those in essence non-criminal emergencies where the SPD is still dispatched. That's something interesting to look at.
And another thing to note, that is a great question. And another thing to note is there are some types of calls and locations where the Seattle Fire Department requires the Seattle Police Department to co-respond with them as well. So.
Thank you. Austin?
Thank you. I apologize. My video is not working today. So I just had a couple of questions. When you were describing the shift to priority calls, you said that the data reflected that at some portion of the day in at least one precinct, we've shifted to priority. So I think what we would need would be a more detailed breakdown of what portion of the day and what portion of the city is actually under those restrictions, if you know what I mean, rather than just sort of a more global, because I recognize we're dealing with a high level presentation here. We're not going into all the detail, but the implication with this slide is that what it implies is that this is citywide for entire days. And so if that's not accurate, then I think that we need a more detailed breakdown. Additionally, I'm curious, I'd be curious about a breakdown of the actual priority 1 and 2 calls, what specific types of calls officers are responding to when they are responding to 1 and 2. I know we have a list of examples, but I'd be curious about a more detailed breakdown. And then finally, I'd be curious what kind of the long-term strategic planning is to, given the fact that we're looking at these staffing shortages, and we probably will for a while, what kind of long-term strategy the city is engaging in to identify areas where officers don't really need to be responding. There was a presentation last year to the city council that did have a little bit more detailed breakdown about the amount of time officers spend on call and stuff, and it indicated that at least 28% of officer time was spent on priority 3 calls and below. So I'd be curious to see where we're at now, if those numbers have changed from last year, and what kind of planning the city's doing to identify efficiencies and try to mitigate any ill effects that way.
Yeah, So I don't know, Dr. Fisher, do you want to give a quick overview of what we're anticipating from the
I
national?
want to just note that we're at time, so quick is important. And
Okay.
for the additional data, if we could maybe just get that in a email or something. And yeah, thank you.
Sure, absolutely. So, and Dr. Fisher can expound on this a little bit, although we don't, like Aaron indicated, we are short on time, but the city did engage with the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform to do a little bit more detailed analysis on just that question. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to release some of that information once that report is finalized with some, it will contain some analysis of just that. But I think you're right that 2020, again, as Dr. Fisher mentioned, and into 2021, it was a very much an off year. So those numbers will be very different than probably what we went over at council presentation in the fall. But it sort of remains to be seen which of those differences will be sustained or not going forward.
All right. I would love to get an answer, but we don't have time today to the sort of the strategies to addressing this, but maybe we can have that conversation and bring it back, offline and bring it back to the commission at an earlier time and later time. I do want to acknowledge that we are over time and apologize, but I know that there's just a lot of questions that people have, and I know that people have also placed questions in the Q&A. We will capture that information so that CPC staff can respond to those. We're, as Laurent mentioned, we're not able to do that during the meeting at this time. And with that, I will turn it over to Brandy to close us out.
I have a question. I mean, as a commissioner, I have a question.
Right, but Reverend Walden, we're 5 minutes over the end of the meeting.
I mean, we can also ask the commissioners, would they like to stay 5 minutes? I mean, we've done that in the past.
Do that.
I mean, I think really and truly, it's outrageous. I mean, all we got to do is ask the commissioners, are they willing to stay 5 minutes for another question?
If you'd like to make a motion, the chairs will entertain a motion to extend the meeting.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we extend the meeting for 5 minutes. For people to be asked 5 minutes for questions.
This is Suzette. I'll second for her.
All right, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All right, any opposed? And we are extended. Go ahead, Reverend Walden.
Well, I think I have two questions. One is about the major events around Seafair and all of that with the amount of officers that you have, and also about the escalating of crime and the investigations around some of the killings and shootings in the community. So there's a lot of concern out there that people are not getting any information, or it just looks like you just said about the detectives might not have enough detectives to be doing the work right now. So I think that I'd really like to have some information, if not now, but later on, and need to at least put it out there that there's a real concern in the community about what's happening on the South End as crime is escalating in the community and actually all over the city right now. And stuff like that. So thank you so much for your generosity and being able to give me a few more minutes for a question. Thank you for your generosity.
And Reverend Walden, we will absolutely follow up with you on that, and everyone else with a little bit more information on that. I think not to speak for Chief Diaz, that's kind of Dr. Fisher's job, but I think as summer rolls around and the courts reopen, obviously they've continued prioritizing violent crime. I think property crime investigations is what ultimately is been suffering the most, or potentially suffering the most. But I think Chief Diaz is keeping a close tabs on all of that and can reassess if he needs to reprioritize where he's putting personnel.
What about major events?
Seafair is not happening this year. But we do have stadium events that are starting to gear up to be almost full capacity. So we're working diligently on solutions to that. So, but I think most of the major events like Seafair and Bumbershoot, those are still not happening this summer. So we are sort of grateful for that, if for no other reason than, our ability to staff them adequately.
Thank you for your generosity.
Are there other, since we have additional time, are there other commissioner questions?
I do have just one, since we've extended. I was a little confused about the answer that you gave to Austin's question about reprioritizing response to a level 3 and 4. I think it was identified that during the pandemic, responses to that were done, people were asked to do it telephonically, to put reports in. Is there a commitment to trying to deal with the staffing issue by removing time-consuming police contact with community members face-to-face and continuing the deprioritizing of responding to level 3 and 4? And with that, I think that Julie talked about a report that seemed to be assessing that, and I just wanted to get clarity around those two things.
I'll let Dr. Fisher address the first question, and then I'll address the second about the timing of the report.
Right. So thank you, Chair Baker. So I think the chief has been pushing, the prior chief and the current chief have both been pushing to make online reporting and telephone reporting more accessible, just because there are a number of what would be termed lower priority, where having an officer there physically there to take the report accomplishes nothing different that could be done over the phone, unless someone really wanted to speak to an officer for a sense of safety and sort of assessment, or maybe gathering evidence that they think might be there, but the officers then might determine there really isn't evidence. So we've been pushing, trying to get more people to do it online or through the phone. The pandemic, I think, got more people comfortable with that, both inside the city and as community members. And that's part of the ask that we made of council with having the ability to move some of our salary savings was what we're calling the blueprint for innovation. Is there are some tools out there, sort of chatbots, for lack of a better phrase, where people could be directed through one portal to get the information, the assistance they need from the department without necessarily having to call 911 or having to wait for an officer for a lower priority call. So that's definitely a direction we're driving at.
And then to the second question, we do have a calls for service analysis that is being done by an external nationally recognized partner. We are awaiting the finalized version of that, and we'll be incorporating it into the mayor's reimagining SPD report that we're hoping that will be released hopefully by the end of June. We've been sort of waiting on a couple of reports from external partners, so that's why it's been delayed a couple of times, but we're hopeful by the end of June there'll be some really good information out on what directions we can go based on that. So
great, thank you so much. And I believe we're turning it over to Brandy now to close us out. But thank you for coming and giving a presentation on SPD staffing.
Thank you for having us.
Just want to add a thank you again to everybody that joined the call this morning and participated in the meeting. I just want to thank everybody. Have a wonderful week and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.